Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. In recovery circles and in recovery meetings, we talk a lot about the terrible experiences we had with drugs and alcohol. And that's what we concentrate on the most because we have to remember those things. Because there were also, for all of us, some good times. And for me, those good times are just as important to remember as the bad times. Because if I remember both of those, I can see how my relationship with alcohol and drugs changed over time and went from something that was a thing that I could enjoy with friends and strangers into something that ruled my life and threatened to ruin my life. Tommy Rosen talks about this changing relationship in his book, Recovery 2.0. I'm going to read what he says about it and share a little bit more about the way my relationship with drugs and alcohol changed over time. He says, often when I speak to people about drug addictions, they're expecting a diatribe about the horrors of advanced addiction, much like what we see in movies or on TV. So it is surprising for them to hear me share stories about what it was like before it got that bad. I share about the times when it was good, when life was flowing, and some of the most memorable times of my teenage years were taking place. These were my formative years, and drugs had a profound and lasting influence on my personal development. It wasn't all good or bad. I had great times, and I had painful times. The main point is that my relationship with drugs changed over time and ultimately became unsustainable and life-threatening. In looking back, we can see where the momentum got started and learn a lot about the way addiction unfolded in my life. So when I look back at my own addiction, I can start to see the way things unfolded. And there were two drugs that I started using heavily at the same time. And actually three: cigarettes, marijuana, and alcohol. Cigarettes were something that a lot of people around me were. I was in college. It seemed like half of the people at college smoked. It seemed like a lot of our professors smoked as well. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. So there wasn't quite the social stigma on it that there is now. And so there was a lot of smoking. It wasn't as unacceptable. But even then, I could see the difference between my friends who just liked to occasionally have a cigarette when they were drinking and people like me who couldn't go an hour without it. And then there was alcohol. And alcohol was a drug that I started to engage with at parties. I started to drink with friends, and at first I didn't give it much thought outside of those situations. And then I started to seek out opportunities to drink, maybe on a weeknight, where usually it had been a weekend thing. And slowly over time, and maybe not that slowly, I mean, within a couple of years, I was very quickly asking people to buy me, because I was still underage, asking people to buy me alcohol so that I could drink on nights where there wasn't a party going on. And maybe even drink by myself because nobody else really felt like drinking. And where I started to notice a difference was that I would have friends who just wanted to watch a movie. And in my mind, that experience would have been made so much better if we all were drinking. But they didn't feel like drinking. They would say things like, "Oh, well, I drank last night. I'm taking a night off tonight." And to me, that just didn't make any sense. Like, why would you take a night off of drinking? Why would you do that? Why would you not want to have more alcohol? And that's when I noticed things starting to diverge. It didn't really cause any major problems at that point, although I certainly ran into some trouble when I was during that age in my life. But Once I got out of college and started working, it's when I really noticed my path separating even further from my friends. I was living with a couple of other guys who were, and some other people who were working professionally. We had all just graduated college. And for a while, it was one big party. It was just kind of college 2.0. But as we started to get into our jobs and people started to get more serious about the work they were doing, their alcohol consumption decreased and their likelihood that they would drink on a weeknight started decreasing. And if they did drink, maybe it was a beer with dinner, something like that. Ooh, and I couldn't understand that at all. It blew my mind. To me, the night wasn't complete unless I had a really healthy buzz by the end of the night. And a lot of nights I wound up taking it way too far. And so that sense of befuddlement with people who weren't drinking like I was, that was the first sign that something had changed and there was something going on that wasn't quite right. And then the other drug that I engaged in with is marijuana. And this was a tricky one because at that point, there were a lot of people smoking pot. And the people who like to smoke pot like to smoke every day. And so my behavior with pot did not seem that different from the people around me. And that extended past college. And what's more, people were relying on pot more because it was a good drug to relax with that didn't cause the same kind of effects of alcohol, the same kind of after effects. You could go home and get high after work and not wake up with a hangover the next morning. You go home, get high, relax some, get a good night's sleep, and wake up feeling great. The problem is when my use of pot and my relationship with it started to change from what my friends were doing, which was smoking a little bit at night, taking the edge off, watching some TV and going to bed, and where I eventually ended up where I felt like I needed to be high literally all the time. I'll talk more about that tomorrow when Tommy gets into his story about his relationship with marijuana. I think it's an important thing for us to consider given the legality of the drug now and given the tendency that a lot more states and places are legalizing marijuana. It's important for us to develop a more realistic understanding of how addiction works with marijuana, which a lot of people, myself included, have assumed in the past wasn't an addictive drug. And so I want to talk more about my addictive behavior with marijuana in tomorrow's video. But for today, it's important to recognize that it's not all bad. You know, I can tell you lots of really cool stories about times where I got drunk or high with friends and strangers and stories that changed my life and times that I look back on as beautiful times in my life. And just because I don't use anymore doesn't mean that those weren't good things that happened. The problem was when I started to change, when my relationship with alcohol and drugs started to change and started to shift into something that was destructive, that was unsustainable, and that, if allowed to continue, would kill me or somebody else. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Have a good one.